and welcome to an Everyday Canines video. In this episode on early takeoff syndrome, I want to talk to you about different handling styles and whether there are limitations to what you can do as a handler. So if you'd asked me this question a couple of years ago, even perhaps 6 months ago, I'd have said to you that as someone who's got a dog with early takeoff syndrome, there are limits to how much I can distance handle my dog. I would say that on the whole, she needs me to be with her to get her over the jump. This is one of the classic things they say about early takeoff syndrome to help dogs with it, is that if you are with them, you can help guide them over the obstacle, and they're using your body position rather than assessing where the jump is themselves to get over the obstacle. I've heard this is something that's been proposed as a way of helping early takeoff syndrome and to improve the dog's ability to jump. As I said, I would have agreed with that up to probably 6 months ago, and I would have said, certainly certain things Sparrow could not do on her own independently. Then I developed an issue, which means that I cannot run. And so I've had to go to distance handling with my dogs, and I thought maybe that's it for Sparrow, maybe that's her agility over lease with me. And it was a shame because she likes doing her training, and even if we didn't compete, it would be a shame not to be able to do training with her. So I started looking at hoopers. Now, the thing with hoopers is that you distance handle. That's the whole point of hoopers, you distance handle. And it turned out that Sparrow's rather good at it. We worked through the whole Good Hoopers online course through the fourth or third lockdown, whichever one it was. We worked through it, got to Platinum. And in Platinum, we did every exercise near enough, sitting in a chair, directing the dog. And they were doing sequences and turns. And she did that. And that made me stop and think, maybe I'm underestimating her. So that's when I started getting back into my distance handling. Now, I would have said to you that doing something like, I've got a sequence set up here and everything's set up at 10-meter spacings and there's turns and there's things like that. And I would have said that would have been impossible for Sparrow to do on her own without me being there to help her over a jump. But she has been doing these courses successfully. She's been doing distance handling. I would have said to you that she couldn't find weave entries if I sent her out on her own to find them independently. She needed me there to guide her. Now, I'm not saying she always gets them. She does struggle with certain left-hand ones, but on the whole, she is doing it. She's driving out over 10 meters sometimes, comes so far behind, and she's finding weave entries. Same with contacts. Tunnels, sometimes. And it's made me reassess what I thought about the way you have to handle a dog with ETO. And this is where I've come to another conclusion, and this is where I wonder if part of the element with the problem we're saying that we have to guide the dogs over a jump to help them get over if they've got ETO, maybe it's not that the ETO means they need the guidance, maybe it's because we haven't taught them how to independently take an obstacle. And if that's the case, then maybe teaching that independence would help with the problem as a whole. And this has made me rethink everything I'm doing. And as I said, I am now doing a lot of distance handling with Sparrow where I just stand in the middle and ask her to do stuff. And she's taking jumps and she's not knocking poles. She's finding tunnels. She's finding weave entries. She's getting on the dog walk. So if she can do that and she can take off over a jump correctly and she had ETO, what does that say about handling? And this is where I think it comes down to the fact that independence in handling, and by that I mean a dog that can go out and do its job all by itself, is very misunderstood. Many people think their dog has the ability to independently do an exercise or a skill, when in actual fact that dog is relying on some body cue the person is giving off, which could be incredibly subtle. And that's getting them over the obstacle. So they call it a facade of learning, a facade of understanding, because you think the dog gets it, but in actual fact, if you took you out of the equation, your dog couldn't do it. And that's where true independent distance handling, which is what I've now had to start looking at, comes into play. Because in true independence, the dog can do the exercise no matter if you're sitting on the ground, no matter if you had your back to them, no matter, they're working purely on a verbal cue, potentially with a hand signal to tell them where they're going, but it could be not, it could be just they're working on a verbal cue with a direction, and they know how to perform the obstacle all by themselves without requiring a physical cue. And that is really tricky to assess. It's the sort of thing that we think we've got, and then we look at it and we go, oh, we haven't. Let me do a quick pointing question. Directions. We set our dog up in front of a jump and we ask them to turn left and right. Now, if you're a distance handler, you want your dog to be able to do a left and right, or at least a turn towards you and a turn away to you with independence. Now, left and right's ideal because the dog should be able to be going away, have no idea where you are, may not even be able to see you, but if you ask them to turn left, they turn left. If you ask them to turn right, they turn right. The other version, which is what I'm saying with Sparrow, and she does still struggle with directionals on their own, is where they turn towards you and turns away from you. They still have to be able to see you to have context. So that is almost independence, but not quite. Now, when I'm teaching these exercises, I want to be standing behind my dog and utterly still, giving no signal whatsoever, so that my dog is actually effectively doing it on their own. And I've been teaching these for a while and I film myself. And that is a very useful thing. If you haven't got a camera that can film yourself or a phone, it might be worthwhile having a mirror up so you can see what you were doing. Because I did a session with Magpie and I would have sworn to you that I did not move a muscle. And when I watched my video back, I leaned ever so slightly. It could be as subtle as just a head turn. It could be as subtle as where your head is facing. And the dogs, because they are so good at picking up body signals, they will use that and go, that's where she wants me to go. That's fine if I'm just stood a little bit behind them, but what if I'm right back at the other end of the field? At that point, they cannot see that signal. And at that point, that's where the learning breaks down. You realise you haven't got true independence. Since I've really looked into doing complete independence, Sparrow's ETO has become less of an issue. So recently we went to agility competition, and this particular agility competition, they use grey weave poles. These have been a nightmare for Sparrow, and I would have said to you, grey weave poles, especially when they're up against fencing, she can't find the entrance. She can't find them for love nor money. She didn't miss an entry the whole 3 days. And I was not with her to guide her in because I was at the back. Now, that made me think, hang on a minute. I said that this is a problem because of the colours and the grey on the green. She can't see it properly. Lighting conditions, etc. The lighting conditions changed over all 3 days. At one point we had low lighting coming over the field, which I thought, well, she'll never find the weave entry in this because it'll block up. She found it. What had changed? The only thing that changed over the 2 years of being stuck in lockdown and pandemic, I'd worked really hard on distance work into those weave poles. And here's another example. Previous to that, I went to the Kennel Club International Agility Festival, and they use a certain type of weave poles, and they're shorter than the weave poles I usually trained on. Now, actually, I do train on these types of weave poles more now, but there used to be a case I never trained on those sort of weave poles, and I only ever saw them at these particular shows. And other people had never had an issue, their dogs were fine. But Sparrow would struggle. The first couple of days she would not be able to weave, she wouldn't understand the weaves. And again I started to think, well, what is she doing with these weave poles? Is it the height? Is something about the weave poles she can't work out where the weave poles are? So again I said, well, that's the ETO. It's easy to say it's ETO, and it probably was something to do with the visual reference and something about the weave poles she was using as a guide which was missing when they were shorter. I then started to train more on those types of weaves, and we went to KCI and I saw the weaves and I thought, well, okay. She didn't miss an entry again, not a single entry. She didn't pop out of them, except when I made a mistake. But so what had changed? Again, it was the training behind it. And this makes me stop and think that maybe with some dogs with ETO, that what actually would help is a true independence on obstacles. Will that help with all dogs? Not necessarily. It does depend. Like all things with ETO, it depends what's going on because it's such a broad catch-all term. But I think with certain dogs, a better understanding of how you perform equipment independently could benefit them hugely. So I've gone from a point where I would have said to you, I've got to be with Sparrow every single obstacle to make sure she gets up them, to a point where I now say to you, actually, my dog can distance handle, and actually significantly distance handle, because if you look at some of the distance handling I'm now having to do, it is serious distance handling. It isn't just sending out. And it is because I've decided to trust the training and work into independence. That makes me think that within your handling, there are no necessary limitations as such, as long as you're prepared to look at the problem and make an effort to train through it. And then say to yourself, well, I have trained through this and it's still not working. Maybe then. But even so, I had a recent training exercise with Sparrow. She had to drive out from a tunnel and find a left-hand weave entry. And she wasn't getting it in training, and we adjusted, we did this, blah, blah, blah. I said, well, that's just, she struggles to find that sort of weave entry. And again, eyes, we went back to eyes. And then at these shows, we were doing the same thing and I couldn't get there, and she was finding the weave entry. I still have to be careful. And this made me realise that she's actually using my body, and my body is what is causing the issue with the weave entries sometimes, because if my body is wrong and she's using my body as the guide and she doesn't actually know how to properly find a weave entry independently, that's the issue. So, take away from this. Maybe getting your dog to truly understand how to do an obstacle independently will help them with their ETO. Maybe we do not have to limit what we say a dog with ETO can do, but we have to look at what we're teaching them to make sure they can do things competently on their own. And maybe developing that understanding will help a lot of dogs with ETO to stop the issue and the problem. I hope that's made sense to you and also helped you to understand what you can and maybe can't do with your dog. And maybe there are fewer can'ts than we think if we really look at the training and what we're doing behind it. If you've enjoyed this video, you might like to subscribe to our YouTube channel, and you can check us out on Facebook and Instagram. We also now have a Buy Me a Coffee support page, and if you'd like to become a supporter of Everyday Canines for some exclusive extras and goodies, come along and join us. And I hope to see you all again very, very soon.